I'm going to introduce actually the interviewer, Chris DeVille. Huge fan of this person, and I'm so glad that he was able to come join us for this special event. But quickly, Chris DeVille is the managing editor of Stereogum, the world's best music blog. It's true, a lot of great writing, and Chris has a lot to do with that. He has written about music, sports, TV, film, religion, parenting, and more, not just for Stereogum, but for The Atlantic, The Washington Post, Rolling Stone, The Ringer, and elsewhere. He is a proud OU alum from HTC, the Honors Tutorial College, where he worked for the Post and ACRN. Any Post or ACRN people out in the audience? All right, Chris is your people. He's good, so connect with him. He is also a proud resident of Ohio, Worthington, Ohio, where he lives with his wife and 3 young children. Please join me in welcoming Chris DeVille to the stage.
Hey everybody, great to be here, and I'm super excited to be speaking today with mxmtoon. She is, at age 22, already an incredibly accomplished performer and artist, and so many hyphenates, multi-hyphenate, a singer-songwriter, a YouTuber and TikToker and Twitch streamer and podcaster, just kind of a incredible case study in building a career from the ground up, starting on a DIY level, and kind of doing it yourself in the modern era. I'm really excited to talk to her and hear what she has to say about her life and kind of how she's done it. So without any further ado, please welcome mxmtoon. So, hey Maya.
Hey.
Yeah, so we were talking backstage, and we were thinking of just kind of going chronologically, more or less, which means we kind of have to start going back to, kind of maybe middle school era.
Oh,
is that
goodness.
right?
Yes. Yeah, that does mean that.
Okay, so I mean, when you first started posting music online, you were 13, living in the Bay Area.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess describe yourself and your life at that point in time. Like, who was this person?
Very little, I would say. As most 13-year-olds, I think you have a very small sense of who you are as a person, even if you feel like it's very big. You're 13, you're like, I know exactly who I am. I'm really good at this class. I have purple binders. Like, I think for me, the biggest piece of my identity was like being an organized student who did everything everybody expected of me, whether it was my parents or my teachers, whoever. And I loved being really good at all those things, so I stuck to things that I was good at. And one of those things that I realized was music. And I found the ukulele when I was in middle school, and that kind of opened up a lot of avenues for me. But yeah, at that point, I think I was just like a half-baked cookie, I guess is the best way to describe it. I was figuring out who I was. I didn't really know that much about me. And so I just kind of did what other people asked me to do, yeah.
What drew you to the ukulele in particular?
I grew up with the classical training in music, so I was playing the cello for around 8 years. I did violin for around 5. I even learned the trumpet largely just to try and play the Star Wars theme song, which I never actually got around to doing. And the ukulele for me was kind of my first introduction to an instrument that kind of defied everything I knew about music thus far, having gone from a classical background. I didn't realize that you could play an instrument and like learn a song that you actually enjoyed listening to within a day. I had been so used to the process of learning like a sonata and then being told that I needed to play it quietly in this area and loudly in this other one, and just hating the whole process at the end of the day. So the ukulele for me was just like a breath of fresh air, yeah.
That's cool. So you started, not just learning songs, but also writing songs. And at what point, how long was it before you started posting songs?
It took me a minute actually to get around to posting original songs. I think, like a lot of people in my generation, the internet was something that I really gravitated to as a tool for self-expression. And so I would post covers and videos, and I was very much that like middle school kid that loved watching like British YouTubers and like would watch like Dan and Phil and be like, I want to do that. I want to be like a really cool YouTuber. And so I'd post videos of myself like talking like I knew the answers to the universe at the age of 12, and I would post covers of songs that I really enjoyed listening to, but never really anything that felt like vulnerable or emotional or true to the feelings and emotions that I was experiencing in actuality as a middle schooler, which sounds so funny in retrospect. But I eventually posted my first original song, and I want to say it was 2017, and that was around 4 years after posting my first thing to the internet. And it was called, oh my God, 1-800-DATE-ME. Mortifying title. And it was just a satirical song about how nobody wanted to date me, and I was sad and lonely on Valentine's Day. Very relatable feeling to have when you're in high school and haven't had your first kiss yet. And I think that was where I thought I was going to go originally. I thought I was going to kind of go the satirical, like, comedy song route, and I didn't, because I posted one song that kind of changed everything for me called Feelings Are Fatal, and it was the first song where I had been honest about like being a sad teenager and kind of letting myself sit in those emotions, and I got such a kind response from people online to just feel like, oh, maybe there's a future in this. Yeah.
So before Feelings Are Fatal, did you have like still somewhat of a following? You're aspiring to be like the British YouTubers, like that had been a somewhat successful effort thus far, even before the pivot in your songwriting?
It had been not so successful on the YouTube side. SoundCloud was actually where I first kind of found an audience that listened to what I had to make, and I was really big on Vine when Vine was a thing. I had a couple accounts there. One was dedicated to like what I thought were very funny videos, and then another one that was dedicated to kind of more artsy, creative endeavors. And through that, I kind of realized how cool it was to be able to not only build an audience on what platform, but kind of figure out how you can engage those listeners and members and followers on other platforms outside of that. And so SoundCloud was one of those kind of parallels that I ended up trying to engage in tandem with my Vine audience. And I had around 2,000 followers on Vine. Thought I was the coolest person to ever exist in the entirety of mankind at that point. Very obviously was not. And I was really lucky that some of those people ended up following me on SoundCloud in the process of what I was posting. And then Vine subsequently ended up dying. And I was lucky.
Vine.
Yeah, R.I.P. Vine.
Great platform.
Great platform. But I got lucky that I kind of learned how to do other things in tandem with it.
So I realize this is maybe predating the Feelings Are Fatal kind of inflection point that you just discussed, but like at what point did you realize that you had like fans or followers, and did that affect, I guess, what were you doing to build up an audience? Was it all like kind of comedy related, and how did the fact that somebody was paying attention, like how did that affect what you were posting?
I think going back to the kind of personality I had when I was in middle school of being like just a really kind of boring person on the outside, I'd say. Like I was just a good student, I was a good kid, I did everything to a T, and the internet was this space where I felt like I could kind of shed all of those expectations that I felt like I needed to hold within myself. And so for a long time, I think, people paying attention to me on the internet didn't actually kind of strike itself as being like a reality, I think, for a minute, largely because when you are on the internet, it's just like a number on your screen. So to me, it felt like I was gaining like experience points in a video game or something. Like it just felt like I was leveling up. And I think the moment that it clicked for me happened a lot farther down the line, when I ended up having Hypebeast find out about my music project and write about me. And there was this moment where I was like, oh my God, I actually have to tell my mom and dad about this. Like, this is mortifying. And they had no idea. At that point, I was just kind of posting and doing anything I wanted to online. And I was a kid that grew up with 2 teachers as my parents. So for them, internet safety was like the pinnacle of everything I had to do. They were horrified to learn that I was not actually, in fact, following those rules, but also very like glad that the worst thing their child was doing was just like making songs about how she wanted someone to date her when she was 17. Yeah, so it took me a minute though to get there. Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting that all this kind of predated kind of really taking the plunge into the music side of things, because I think about like over the last year or so, there's been some pop stars that I guess are a few years older than you. I think about like Halsey or FKA Twigs or Florence and the Machine. There's been kind of this complaint. Oh, my label wants me to do TikTok promo. They won't release my song unless I do TikTok promo, and it strikes them as kind of an extracurricular, extra task that's being put on them. But it seems like that whole kind of persona building thing was already kind of ingrained in what you were doing. I mean, do you like that part of the work, and does it feel like work to you?
I think it definitely feels more like work nowadays, given that the scope of what I do is a lot bigger than it was when I was a teenager. But I think it does feel semi-natural in the fact that I think naturally as like a 22-year-old, and a lot of people in this generation as well, just grew up engaging with social media with that kind of understanding and knowledge on how to post things that felt reflective of who they are or who they want to be or whatever it is. So I think it just felt like a very natural thing to do and gravitate towards. But yeah, I don't know. There are days where I'm like, oh, I wish I didn't have to like post a million TikToks to kind of like get my voice across to a larger group of people. But I also think there is an incredible power, obviously, in the fact that you can reach so many people with an app like TikTok. But it's funny to watch, these like big pop stars have to adjust to one of the biggest shifts that's happened in the music industry in recent memory. And some of them do a really good job of it, and some of them are still learning, and that's okay because I'm still learning, and it was designed for me, I guess. Yeah.
Right. So let's talk about kind of the early musical development too. So you kind of shifted to this bearing your soul, being really authentic instead of the satirical comedy route. How did things develop from Feelings Are Fatal, and kind of how did momentum build there?
I think from that point on, I probably was just using social media like a little too much because it gets really addictive to like watch those likes and comments roll in, and I'm like, I have a 17-year-old brain, and so I'm immediately just like, ooh, this is fun and cool, and so I wanted to keep doing it, and so I just kept doing it, and I think it was really encouraging though for me to see from a songwriting perspective that being emotionally vulnerable was still something that was, engaging to an audience of people. I think for so long in my own individual life, I had felt like I had needed to hide my emotions behind like a curtain of satire or comedy to kind of soften them a little bit for someone to listen to. So to learn that being completely honest about how I felt wasn't something that was, alarming or disgusting or whatever, but instead something that could be empowering, that kind of set the tone for what I wanted to do with all of my music going forward, and making songs that felt like they could be vulnerable, but finding power in that vulnerability. And I do feel like that's kind of become the ethos of mxmtoon. Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the early music is obviously very minimal, stripped down. It seems like that really kind of dovetails nicely with the intimacy of kind of, I'm speaking to you directly into the camera. You are able to kind of get a view into, my life and the real me. Was there anything conscious with that, or was that just like kind of I'm gonna write these kind of minimal, just kind of largely me and my ukulele songs at first? did the online format contribute to that kind of the way that your music developed?
I think it did, and it was pieces of like watching other artists. Like Dodie was a great example of someone that I really looked to as an inspiration point for being someone who was that kind of dual hyphenated artist of being like a content creator, but also being someone whose artistry really inspired me as an audience member. And so I think there was like a piece of like, I'm watching another person do this and like reach people in this way, like then that means it's possible for me to do the same thing within my own project. And there was also an aspect of like, I literally don't know how music production works, and I only know how to play like these 4 chords that I've learned from YouTube, and so I'm just gonna kind of dive into GarageBand and make something that feels simple, largely because I didn't have the tools or vocabulary to figure out how to move beyond that. But I do feel like it contributed to like a really wonderful kind of world that I was creating in the process of doing that.
So somewhere, you already mentioned SoundCloud, and obviously TikTok came into the picture. Vine died so that TikTok could live, and all that. There's been kind of a progression of platforms. Twitch came into the picture as well, which you're very active on as well. What has it been like to try to navigate these different platforms and figure out what goes where, and like how I've got followers here, and maybe the different people follow me here. I guess how do you juggle all that?
Not without difficulty. There's a lot of different places for people to post content. I think I even get overwhelmed by it sometimes, but in the beginning, before TikTok was a thing, obviously Vine was a thing until it wasn't, but I do feel like there's always been kind of an understanding that at least I've had on a personal level of like, oh, all these different platforms are just different avenues for certain parts of who I am. So Twitch is to express my love of video games, and YouTube is to talk about like, I don't know, whatever random miscellaneous thought I'm having that week. And then, Vine or TikTok is for those short spurt ideas that I can kind of quickly pick up my phone and create. And so to me, it just felt like they're kind of just different tools to access and figure out how to use, less so like, okay, I'm engaging this platform because I want this type of audience. And that wasn't really something that I realized could be done. I think that was a very later kind of realization as I ventured into the music industry and had other people kind of help me understand from like a statistics perspective. But yeah, I don't know. I just really like social media, and as an audience member, I just consume a lot of stuff. And so I think by nature of doing that, I figured out like, oh, I just want to see if I can do it myself too. Yeah.
So it seems like you have a lot of different projects. You have History Podcast. Yeah. You've done voice acting, graphic novels. It seems like these things have all kind of arisen organically. Just is it just like kind of opportunities that arise, or ideas that percolate, and you're like, well, I have this idea, I might as well do it. I guess I can imagine. Like, we just published an interview with T-Pain today, and he was talking about how back in kind of the height of the T-Pain era, his management was like, music, and why are you doing, you're getting distracted on these side things, so you need to focus on music. And now he fired his management, and he just, he's on Twitch too, and he's, he's doing a million different things. He's doing The Masked Singer, yada, yada, yada. So I guess what I'm wondering about is, like, was there ever any pull to kind of like bear down on one thing, and how are you able to maintain different projects without letting one slide?
It's difficult, and I do feel like now being 22, my like adrenaline for a lot of the stuff is kind of starting to wane, just because like I am not very old, but I am getting older, and like I do want to just kind of sit and chill and maybe not make every part of my life like a piece of content at the end of the day, which was something that I was doing for 5 years. And it gets to a point where I am now old enough to realize like the pros of doing something like that, but also the cons that come with just exhausting all of your energy and giving everything in yourself a way at the end of the day, whether it's through YouTube videos or songs or whatever it is. So it's difficult. It's not done without kind of trying to figure out how to manage my energy level through it. But I do also feel like everything that I've done so far within mxmtoon, I've been really lucky to work with people that kind of encourage an idea I might have or help me find opportunities. And so something like a graphic novel was something that was born out of like, I really wanted to try and just do that. And something like the history podcast was born out of the idea of like, oh, it'd be neat to just try podcasting. And COVID happened, and so we were like, this is probably the right time to, attempt to do something like that. I'll be home for the next foreseeable future. And then something like voice acting, I felt really lucky. Square Enix came to me with the opportunity and asked for me to audition, but video games have always been something that I've engaged with underneath the umbrella of mxmtoon, and so it felt very kind of like a natural progression to step more into that world and figure out how I could involve myself in that space. Yeah.
Yeah, since you mentioned COVID happening, it's interesting. You were definitely, you had already released a debut album by the time that happened, and were out there playing shows IRL, and yet at the same time, so much of your career was already rooted online. So, how much of a speed bump was COVID for you in terms of career development? It seems like you've certainly been able to just keep zooming upward.
Yeah, I'm really lucky that I did have that natural sense to kind of dive back into what I had been doing at the beginning of my career. But it was also really tough to have that kind of taste of what things could look like, whether it was from a touring perspective or like a collaboration perspective. I had just started doing my first sessions with other artists. I had never worked with another person face-to-face before. And so it felt like in a lot of ways I was about to like spread my wings. And then as we all know, everybody couldn't do that anymore. And so we were stuck inside. But from like a business perspective, I was very, very lucky to have already built those like verticals and spaces online for myself to kind of continue fostering. And I remember having so many conversations with other artists and, people in the industry generally of just feeling like it was very confusing. And it still is confusing, I think, in a lot of ways to adjust to how things have changed, because even if we feel like things are going back to normal, it will never be the same as it was before the pandemic. And we see that with the way that TikTok is such a big piece of like musical success and an indicator of how songs gain popularity. We see it across the board with a lot of things. But yeah, I think in the moment of it happening, I was like devastated, but also grateful. And I think, 3 years after the beginning of it, I've like come to realize, it affected me in more ways than I thought it did, but it also, obviously, I did benefit and was really lucky to have the position that I did.
So it feels like things have been really, a gradual progression, kind of building and building. But, you already mentioned getting a big response to Feelings Are Fatal, but have there been certain projects or songs or collaborations or even like certain TikToks that, blew up that felt like, they were turning points, or that they blew up in ways that you didn't anticipate?
The biggest one for me would be the trajectory of my song Prom Dress. That was a song I could not fathom the level that it would eventually reach. It just got to platinum status, which is really exciting. But
congrats on that.
Thank you. But it was a song I wrote when I was 17, and so it was written in those very same emotions that I like wanted to hide initially, and then in the process of working on my first album, it was one of the first demo songs that came up for me as like, okay, we should include this, and it ended up becoming the lead single of the whole project. But TikTok was also on this kind of vertical pathway that people weren't fully tapping into yet. The music industry wasn't aware of it. And so I saw that and was like already engaged on it as like an audience member. I was posting just like really stupid content on TikTok on a daily basis, and eventually promoted my song Prom Dress. And it got this whole other life outside of what I had ever imagined it to do. And it still does. I mean, like, it's like my own personal Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas, except it's for like prom season, and every single year in May, I get this influx of videos that are tagging me and people doing like a little transition video into their prom outfits. And it's so great, and I feel really thankful for that. But it is funny, like I do feel like that is a huge piece of what has come to define mxmtoon as a whole, but it wasn't something that I ever thought would end up happening that way, but that's just how TikTok works, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Mariah probably didn't anticipate the streaming economy and what that would do for her. So, in terms of your discography, you know, you had the debut, The Masquerade, and then there were the Dawn and Dusk EPs, which were billed as kind of a graceful goodbye to your earlier work. What was the thinking behind like making a clean break there? Was it just like a matter of moving on to a different musical style, or was there something more to it?
It was definitely born out of kind of the desire to learn how to make music in a different environment than I had been previously. Whether I made The Masquerade with my friend Robbie, who has his own project, Cave Town, and so it was a very familiar environment to kind of sit in a small studio space. We got access to a studio. It was both our first times working in a recording environment. We ended up using none of the space other than like a 2 foot by 2 foot area because we were both so used to working out of like our bedrooms. And I think after making that album, it was a great learning experience to just kind of work with a producer to help me record things. But I had this other kind of want to like talk with people outside of that, people who have been in the industry, and learn from them myself by being in those collaborative spaces of like their home studios or being in LA and working with people. And I really was so lucky to have that opportunity. So I think through those sessions and collaborating for the first time on like co-writes and stuff like that, I just learned like, oh, like ukulele is not all that there is. And it's an important piece of what mxmtoon has started with, but it doesn't need to be this all-defining instrument or sound that carries through everything I do. So I think it was about not only diversifying the sound of mxmtoon, but also letting myself as Maya grow up a little bit and let myself kind of explore different avenues of creativity that I hadn't yet tapped into.
So have you, I mean, obviously with Rising, the most recent album, it is, there's a lot of different sounds happening on it, the arrangements, all kinds of things are happening. It's in some cases bigger and brighter, and I guess, have you gotten any pushback from like your day ones about evolving?
Not really. I mean, my audience is so nice. Like, that is the one thing I just consistently see across the board is people are so kind. And I was so lucky when I released Rising because it just felt like everyone was like there for it. They were excited for me because they could tell that I was excited about it. And so just to have that mutual like support was so wonderful. And Rising was an album I think that I've wanted to make for a long time. And it was, I feel like, the culmination of being now luckily in a position where I can engage kind of the collaborators that I love working with and like, wanting to enlist them in making this vision that I've had probably for as long as I can remember. And it was making an album that was like largely based and made for like my younger self to listen to. It was based off of the songs that I loved listening to on like a Hello Kitty radio when I was 5 years old and appealing to that inner child. So people were just excited. And I credit that to kind of like, I've grown up alongside a lot of the people that I've met on the internet. And we've gone through probably some of the worst years of your life when you're 13 through 22. It's hard to top kind of just like how lost you feel as a person. And so to do that alongside people and to know like, have them watch me change and also for them to know that I've watched them change as well. I think that there's just this open line of like, who knows what's going to happen, but we're here by each other's side and we're going to figure it out.
Yeah, I imagine that kind of maintaining the connection with people who've been following you for a long time, as the base continues to grow, that it could become complicated. Like I remember about 10 years ago when I was writing for the local paper in Columbus, I went to a show with 21 Pilots who were kind of like starting to blow up at the time, and they had this like crisis where after their shows they came out and they would greet the fans, and they saw some of the same fans at every show because they were small enough that the fans could get access to them. And so it was like, I don't know how we're going to navigate this, 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now as we get, and obviously they're playing arenas and stuff now, so I'm not entirely sure what they're doing. But I guess, are there little things that you do that kind of are, I don't know if they're Easter eggs or if they're kind of callbacks or whatever for the older fans?
Well, I'm no Taylor Swift, but I do feel like there's areas where I hopefully have been able to still have those moments of connectivity with people who have been longtime listeners, whether it is through shows or I'm way too active on Twitter. It's kind of a problem at this point, and I need to step off of it a little bit.
Same.
It's hard not to be, but I think through social media just as a whole, it does, and 21 Pilots, I'm not sure how active they are on social media in that sense, but it has been a great tool for me to just have a conversation with somebody, even if I'm not able to see them in person after a show or whatever it is. But I don't know, I love meeting people. I think that it's one of the greatest joys of what I get to do is growing up alongside other people. And so to keep those points of connection, it feels important, I guess it feels important to them, but it also feels very important to me because I didn't go to college. I didn't have a community of people to grow up alongside, I think, in the way that I thought I was always going to have. And so for me, the internet has provided me a lot of solace in just feeling less alone in what I'm experiencing and feeling. And that's the case for a lot of people, even if you do go to university. But yeah, I try to. I've written letters to people, and I'll have my TM drop them off to the people that come to the shows if I'm not able to see them. Through COVID, I did that, and through Twitch streams, it's really easy to see someone that you've know is there for a long time, and you can engage in a conversation that way. So I do my best in places that I can, but there's a lot of people.
You mentioned, you brought up Taylor Swift when I said Easter eggs. There is one, I know Sad Disco, I think you've talked about how that's kind of like a callback to Prom Dress almost.
Yes.
And I don't know if is that kind of world building element something that you've had in mind in your songwriting at all, where the kind of different songs interact with each other or exist in a universe with each other?
Oh, absolutely. I very much think of Sad Disco being kind of the older sister to Prom Dress. It feels like they echo each other in kind of themes and stuff. And then even one of the biggest things that I'm proud of, I never saw anyone pick up on, but my song First, which is the last track on my EP Dusk, ends with the chapter has to end. And then the very first verse of Mona Lisa on the album that came after, Rising, is about how a new one's beginning. And so there's a very narrative element definitely to the songwriting, whether it's because it's been intentional or just by nature of I think I probably am a pretty repetitive person at the end of the day. And so there's certain ideas and themes that I just gravitate to, generally speaking. Those end up in the song. So I think they all become connected in that way, but there is a level of intentionality that does play a role. Mm-hmm.
That's cool. In terms of building albums, I know there's always kind of an ongoing crisis, existential crisis within the music industry about is the album dead? Does the album matter? From someone coming from the context that you're coming from in terms of your career and how you built up your career, what does the album mean to you? Are albums important statements? Is an album an important part of your, kind of what you're presenting to the world?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think albums will ever be dead. I feel like there is so much merit in the world building that comes when you make a project in its entirety and you think about lyrics and visual imagery and the whole deal of making something. And we can look at, Taylor Swift is a very huge artist, but I think she's a great example of someone who does have that world building happen in every single era of what she's done so far. She's doing a tour called the Eras Tour right now. She's done a really good job of it. And I think it showcases the importance from an audience perspective that people still appreciate that. And they appreciate having things that feel immersive and cohesive. But again, it's artist to artist. Maybe someone is going to just gravitate more towards singles or shorter projects and EPs. But I know for me personally, I've really loved the experience of working on a full-length project and diving into something like that and trying to really think about it. It feels like I'm like like making a movie or something almost at the end of the day. So yeah, I don't think they'll be dead. I think they have pockets of moments because of viral sensations happening online, but I think albums are still important. Mm-hmm.
So then with Rising, can you tell us a little bit more about like kind of where you were coming from in terms of the things you were writing about, or I don't know, is there like a story to the album or any kind of like thematic kind of thrust to the album as you see it?
Yeah, I think everything I've written probably so far does kind of lay around the themes of growing up, and that's something that I think about a lot because we're always growing up, we're always figuring out who we are. And I'm also a very nostalgic person. I wear like rose-colored glasses looking back on everything in my life. I could like think about last Tuesday and be like, oh, that day was amazing, and it actually like sucked in reality. But I just really love looking at the past, and so for me, Rising was largely written during COVID. And so a lot of those songs, I think I realized that it was really hard for me to think or let myself sit in the emotions that I was feeling presently because it was so sad to look at like the world around us, and it was very sad to look at my own life and, you know, experiencing loss and looking at global loss of whatever we were going through. And so instead I focused on like, all right, so let me just ask like a younger version of myself what she would have wanted to hear. And so I think a lot of those songs ended up being more on the pop side of the spectrum or being more upbeat, not because I think I did want it from like the now perspective, but it was largely kind of like, okay, this voice in my head is like a lot clearer and easier for me to understand than the version of myself that I'm existing in right now. That sounds so out there, but I think that was part of it, yeah.
That's cool. So obviously that was a 2022 release, and we had the deluxe later in the year, and now it's 2023. Is there some other like body of work kind of in development, or is it kind of too early to kind of put any parameters around what's happening creatively?
I'm always thinking about the next thing. I think that just is how my brain works, and I constantly have ideas running through my mind at like 100 miles per hour. It's just about how I can get them down on a page and actually execute them effectively. So there are things on like the horizon. I am working on something that I do feel like paying attention to your inner child is a really big thing that I found to be very important in a personal level and also like from a professional level as well. And like the merit that comes from, like answering questions that you might have had like 4 years ago and kind of getting to them finally wherever you are in your life now. So I hope to kind of do that with whatever comes next. But I mean, LP3 is of course something that I'm thinking about and actively kind of like workshopping and figuring out. But I don't know, I'm also like, I'm 22. I gotta like let myself live a little bit, let myself be lost a little bit, and hopefully I'll figure it out. Yeah.
That's cool. I want to bounce back a little ways. You were talking about how prom dress kind of surpassed your expectations, and you couldn't have predicted the kind of annual phenomenon that it would be. When you go viral in that way, does that affect the way that you write in the future, or like I guess I feel like it has to have some kind of effect, but is it like something where it's, if you mentioned it feels good to get a response online, so like is it something where you intentionally are kind of driven to write a song that is going to have a similar impact, or maybe you kind of revert against that and you're like, well, I'm going to intentionally push back against any kind of compulsion I have to try to go viral? Like how does the experience of having a hit like that affect the writing process?
It's weird, especially when the hit you have is about your like senior year in high school, and now you're like 4 years after releasing that, and you're still singing it on stage, being like, "Oh my God, I went to prom for like 10 whole minutes, and my biggest song is about that experience." So there's a weirdness to it, and just like the fact that you grow up and you grow past whatever the moment in time is that you were writing about. But I do think there was a lot of moments where I was like, maybe, is this what I have to write about for the rest of my life? Like, am I going to be writing about stories from my high school until the day I die? Like, I hope not, because high school kind of sucked and I don't want to like live in that experience forever. So I think I just had to like sit with that and feel it and be like, okay, but everything is just so random and these things happen in moments that you can't even predict. And I have to just like, as much as I feel that pressure to continue a narrative from prom dress or whatever it may be, that's not the reality that I'm experiencing. And if the art that I'm making is not reflective of what I'm actually feeling, like, what's the point? And so to kind of just soldier on and not let myself be like, okay, yeah, I'm going to be crying in a prom dress forever. I just laugh at it and think that's funny, because what a ridiculous thing to have a song about you crying in a prom dress be your biggest hit to date. Yeah, but it's cool. I'm glad for it, yeah.
So for someone who is, aspires to, I mean, you have a fairly unique, your career is unique enough that it would be hard to replicate on a exact level. There's a lot of specificity to you. But like, how do you have advice for people, who aspire to kind of be a public creative persona, I guess, or an artist, I guess artist is the word for it. Yeah. But when you're on all these different mediums and different platforms or whatever, it feels like artist is almost like too limited of a word. I guess the point is, for somebody who is starting out and wants to kind of follow a similar trajectory, how do you feel like the landscape is different now than it was when you were starting, and do you have any advice for obstacles to avoid, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still figuring it out. Obviously, I probably always will be. I think every person online is going to be figuring it out, because the people who are even making the apps that we're like using don't even know what they're doing. So, we're all kind of just, I don't know.
Shout out Elon.
Yes, shout out Elon. Oh my God, what is that man doing? Jesus. Yeah. But I think my biggest piece of advice is just it's so cheesy, but I think there's truth in it. You just have to be yourself. And it comes across very obviously from an audience perspective when that's not the case. And I think authenticity is the only way that you're going to reach people in a genuine way, in a way that they will want to keep watching. And we see that happen with TikTok creators. We see that happen with musicians writing songs that they don't think are going to go viral, but end up they do get to these huge heights. So I think just like making things that you feel genuinely excited about is going to show itself much more clearly than making something you feel like is going to do well just for the sake of doing well. But also to give yourself some grace. I think that's something that I've been like really trying to do with myself, is like, again, nobody knows what they're doing. The people who make the apps don't know what they're doing. You don't know what you're doing. Like, it's just, don't put pressure on yourself to be extraordinary, because I think that it will only lead you to like disappointment. And you don't deserve that. Nobody deserves that. I just think like, it sounds really heady, it sounds really like cheesy and dumb, but like follow your instinct and what you feel like naturally sits well with you, and that will showcase itself to other people if that's your goal. And if it's not, that's fine too. Just make things because you like making them, and do that. I don't know. Yeah.
What's been, I guess, you have all these, you so much of what you've done has been kind of DIY, but then you do have, as you've gone along, there's kind of a business that's built up around you. So like, how do you approach that, and like kind of, at what stages in the game where you're like, oh, I need to bring in other people to help me with this?
Pretty early on, I feel like. I was in my like senior year of high school, in my like history seminars, responding to emails that I was getting from people in the industry. Thank God my history teacher he was in on it. He knew exactly what I was doing. One of my biggest supporters. Thank you, Dr. Lopez. But it was really stressful because, I'm a 17-year-old kid. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have anybody to help me. Both my parents are educators. They don't know what to do. And my dad literally ordered a book off Amazon called Everything You Need to Know About the Music Industry and read it. And he was like, okay, I'm here to help you. And I was like, the last thing I want is a dadager. Please, God, no. Like, I don't want my dad to be my manager for the rest of my life. And so I think that was a turning point, too, where I was like, oof, like, my family, I would just want them to be my family. I don't want them to be somebody who's like manning me from a business perspective. And I got really lucky. My current management team reached out to me over email, and I asked for them to meet with my family and kind of moved on from there. And my music teacher from middle school had played in a band with someone who was now a music lawyer, and that was how I ended up getting my legal team together. But like, I just got so lucky with a lot of those kind of bricks falling into place. But I could not have done any of this without help. And I do a lot of like the creative stuff on my own, but like, oh my God, I was a kid when I started. I still am a kid, and I can't do that without other people helping kind of guide me and help me along the way to actualize the ideas that I have.
And then in terms of, kind of building out the world of mxmtoon offline, I guess, one of the biggest things is because you do have songs now that aren't they're full band kind of songs. What was the process of like putting together a live show like? I mean, I guess it's funny because like a lot of musicians like kind of it starts with I'm gonna get the band together, and this was I guess much later in the process.
Yeah, I had never played with a drummer before. Had never done like any of that. Actually, well, I'd played in a band when I was 10 years old in my lunchtime rock band at school. But beyond that, I had never done it before. I was just like, my shows were largely like a podcast where I occasionally played music and mostly forgot my lyrics. And that's just a reality of like when you first play your live shows, you have no idea what you're doing. And so when I brought in a band, it was exciting to play with people who I like, they're professionals. These people do this for a living. And I felt like I was just like a silly teenager who would bring her ukulele on stage and like play songs. And I think that was like a moment for me where I was like, oh, wait, this is my job. Like, this is my career. And I'm on stage with people who are really good at what they do. And I'm lucky to share this space with them. But it was difficult. It was interesting. I'm now used to it, having been like 4 years in the process of playing with some people behind me and like helping me get through the tracks. But in the beginning, I was like, what do I do? Like, how do I interact with this? I had been behind a screen for so long and doing shows alone for so long that it was a very foreign experience.
Cool. So I want to open us up to Q&A from the crowd as well, which I already have a few entered here. You can enter questions through the app, the Summits app, and one that relates back. You're talking about bringing in. You got the chance to start working with different people and having different collaborators. One submission here is, who are some artists that you love, and who would you like to collaborate with?
Good question. Some artists that I love, I have been really, really loving Rina Sawayama lately. She's one of my favorite artists. I think she's so cool. I just watched her in John Wick. Great movie, by the way. I really admire her. I feel like I'm not sure what we would make, but I think when I think about collaborators and people I want to like work with, it's mostly just people I want to talk to. So Rina's one of them. Lizzo is another. I just really love Lizzo. And from like people that I've worked with, like Chelsea Cutler is a name of an artist that I really enjoy. Noah Khan is another great person and individual. Saw some nods. We love Stick Season. He's wonderful. I don't know. I think I can safely say I'm probably down to work with anybody. I like meeting people. I am still very socially awkward, but it still doesn't take away from the fact that like I admire a lot of these individuals, and I would love to just be a fly on the wall watching them in their creative process. And me, if I join in, great. If I don't, also fine. Mm-hmm.
Cool. Another submission here. Do you regret starting off with the kind of satirical, ironic stuff, or do you feel like it helped you build confidence to eventually post more sincere stuff?
I think it was a good gateway to get into the sincere stuff. I still view comedy as being like a really great tool for being honest and relating to people. I love comedians. I just still love that world. I don't think I want to be in it, but I like to watch it. And satirical songs are still something that I even listen to, and I am appreciative of the start. If anything, it gives me a really funny origin story, so I'll take it. Yeah.
What's your process for releasing a song? They follow that up with what tools do you use? I'm not sure if they mean the kind of production of a song, or if we're talking about kind of the campaign to distribute a new song into the world, because rollouts obviously are a thing.
In the beginning, the process has changed obviously over the years as it's grown in the team size and who's helping out with all of it. In the beginning, it was literally just exporting a WAV file, not even a WAV file, exporting an MP3 onto my computer desktop and then immediately uploading it and download it up to DSPs, all these different places. And I listened back to those files and I'm like, ooh, rough. But I'm glad now that I have help to people, whether it's, producers helping record the actual thing, or sound engineers, or, people who mix and master. It takes a village of people to actually make a song come to fruition. And I am really lucky to have that tool available. But I think it also goes to show that you don't need those parts if you want to upload music and then have it immediately available for listening. That's also possible, and there's a lot of merit in that. And my project, I feel like the early years of it is a great example of that, and that people will still listen regardless of the sound quality. Don't worry. But you can also do it the other route of employing other people to help you. And there's a lot of talented people out there that are really good at what they do and totally deserve the opportunity to shine.
Here's one that you probably get a lot. Where does mxmtoon come from? What's the origin of the name?
I get that all the time. It was my gamer tag when I was 11 years old, and so I used it as my username on Instagram for a cartoon project that my dad was the one who came up with it, so I guess I still have a dadager at the end of the day because he made the name. But it's my initials, MXMT, and then we added toon on the end for all the cartoons, and I had 700 followers on my art Instagram. I even got commissioned by That Common White Girl, and I thought that was the peak of my existence at that point. And I was drawing, so it started off as a visual arts project, and people laugh. They're like, "You should have changed it to TUNE when you went over to music," but I just didn't. I think it's funny that someone's gamer tag ended up being the name of their music project. Yeah.
It feels really appropriate.
It does indeed. Yeah.
As your career has progressed rapidly, they write, how have your family and friends from home reacted? Have they treated you any differently after seeing your online presence?
My parents still treat me the same way, which is good. It's nice to be humbled at the end of the day. I'm really thankful. My mom and dad are my biggest fans. Pretty sure my dad doesn't own a single shirt that's not mxmtoon merch anymore, which he loves because he doesn't have to pay for any of it. And my family is just so supportive. I'm so lucky. They come to all the shows that they possibly can. They're in the audience as often as possible. My cousins, who are 10 and 7, think I'm the coolest person in the whole world, which is great for me. She's, my youngest cousin, Kaya, who's almost in middle school, probably won't think that for very long, so I'll just take it when I can get it. But they're so super supportive, and I live with my brother in Brooklyn, and I just am happy to be as close with my family as I am, and to have them just support me and not manage me in the process of pursuing this whole career. Mm-hmm.
All right, next one. What is it like hearing your song in a TV show, such as your song in Heartstopper?
It's so cool. It's the coolest thing in the whole entire world. The moment that Heartstopper was such a huge moment because I love the show, and so I loved the comics too, so it was really cool to see that happen, to canonically exist in a universe of a book that I enjoy. I was like, oh, this is the best. But actually the moment that I freaked out the most was when I was randomly watching Love Island, and then all of a sudden Fever Dream started playing. And I literally had to did a double take around my room. I was like, where am I? I must have signed a legal agreement for the sync to happen at some point, but I couldn't remember, and I had just gone back and watched Love Island, and I was like, oh my God, this is the coolest thing ever. And this British show that I watched, this is so sick. So that was the moment it hit me the most. But Heartstopper was like, oh wow, like this is a huge moment online too, to like see this whole fan base of this, story, and for people to like share the video and be like, did you know you're in Heartstopper? And I was like, yes, I signed the legal agreement. Like I did know, but thank you for sharing your excitement with me. So yeah.
All right, so here's one on the technical side. What DAW instruments, etc., do you use?
Ooh. Not many. I still am only talented at GarageBand, and I would say that I'm not super talented at GarageBand to begin with. I still use like the keyboard input thing on like Logic is like the only understanding of digital audio software that I really have. So you don't need to be talented at musical instruments to end up having a career in music. I feel really thankful that most of my knowledge came from YouTube, and I've made it this far. Yeah. So I think that was a question, right?
Yeah, that's it.
Am I smart enough to even understand the question? That was my big worry.
Yeah, it seems like you're smart enough.
Great.
What happens when a song idea comes to you? Do you write it down immediately? Do you let it percolate in your brain a little bit? Do you have a certain process that you follow?
I usually write it down in my notes app. It's very disorganized on my phone. Most of them are kind of like empty notes with no subject line, or in my voice memos. If I think of a melody, I'll record it. But again, there's no title on it, so I'll just go back into my voice memos and be like, what was that? And it's just like me half asleep being like, but sometimes it ends up working and sometimes it doesn't. Most of the time it doesn't, but that's my process. It's not like, I don't know, I don't have like a notebook where I write it down. I wish I was like that cool and, had everything organized and everything, but it's mostly just like a notes app that has a bunch of bullet points, and I'll maybe pay attention to like 20% of them, and maybe like 10% of them actually end up turning into songs, and like 2% of them end up getting put out into the world. So just a trial and error. Mm-hmm.
You have a tour this summer with Cave Town and others. Are you excited to do a tour with people in the industry you enjoy or work with?
Very, very excited. I'm friends with every person that's on that tour, Ricky, Grant, and Robbie. They're all wonderful people. I have never done a joint tour in that way, so it's like a double headliner, I think. And so I'm actually also glad I'm not going last in the set list, which I was really excited about. I was like, oh, I can go to bed earlier, which is the lamest thought ever. But I was excited about that. It's my first time doing amphitheaters, too. I've never done outdoor venues before, and we're starting off at the Greek in LA, which is terrifying. I'm so scared, but it is going to be great, and I'm very excited about it, yes.
This is, I feel like you maybe have hit on this already, but somebody asked top 3 pieces of advice for an emerging artist. Now you get to like prioritize the previous answer. You can
I've got to consolidate
make it hierarchical.
I'm going to try and be less wordy this time. Okay. Being genuine was clearly one of the biggest things. I think just sticking to what your heart says. Number 2, don't make all of your hobbies turn into a job. I think that is something that I learned a little too late. I now keep video games as kind of something that's solely for me at the end of the day, and it's really easy to make everything that you enjoy a piece of content because you're like, oh, I love this thing, like I want to share with everybody, but you have to make sure that you keep a piece of yourself for yourself at the end of the day. And then the last thing would be, I would say, in an industry like the music industry, one of the biggest things that I was worried about was that people were kind of going to be like, not so nice all the time or out to get you, and like it's really easy to be like, oh, it's kind of scary and daunting, but by and large, people are pretty nice. And I think if you can kind of believe that and build community and make connections where you can, you'll really benefit from that. Yeah, I think that's the best way to kind of keep it consolidated. Mm-hmm.
Cool. Was your rapid growth in following overwhelming at times?
Yeah, I mean, like anything, my whole world when I was in high school, my class was literally 120 kids. And so to have suddenly this huge community of people online and have all these people like pay attention to what I was saying was terrifying. But it was also really exciting. And I am lucky to have like such a great in-person community that kind of helped me stay less overwhelmed by the huge growth in listenership or followers or whatever it was, to help me kind of not feel so lost at the end of the day. But yeah, it was terrifying. It still is sometimes, but I don't know. I'm glad that I'm a little bit older now and I have a better sense of who I am. Yeah, but it was difficult when you're a teenager, and that happens for sure.
Related question, you kind of alluded to this when you mentioned, you're going to make the leap to amphitheaters and play the Greek and all that. Do you ever get stage fright, and how do you overcome it?
All the time. I had stage fright coming out here today. I was like shaking in my boots. I am nervous all the time. It's probably because I have generalized anxiety disorder, but outside of that, I do get stage fright. And I think at the beginning it was something that I was very angry about. I was really upset that I get so nervous about things that I would like get sick or like feel just completely like I couldn't talk to anybody. But rewiring my brain to just understand that anxiety as being a piece of like, that's just, it showcases how much you care about something. And if you can look about it from that perspective, that was really helpful for me to understand, to be like, oh, this thing isn't like trying to, sabotage me and make me have the worst performance of my life. It's just an indication of like, oh, like you really just want to do well, and you will do well, and you have nerves, but that doesn't define the way that everything's going to turn out. It'll be just fine. And I've bombed many a time on stage. I am more comfortable with it now. It's okay. It happens, and it's part of the learning process. Mm-hmm.
This is maybe also related to the the TV sync, maybe parallel to hearing your song in a TV show, but is it exciting when big-name music artists listen to your music?
Oh my God, yeah. I remember when it's so funny because I feel like the names that mattered to me were maybe not people's like definition of other like big names. Like Dodie was a really big person for me, and so when I learned that Dodie knew who I was like, what? You actually like are aware of my existence as a human being? Or it's very strange. It's exciting because I think before being an artist, I'm a fan. I just love creators and the art that they make, and so it still feels weird to me that like I happen to be someone who's online that has her own audience of people that listen to what she does, because I really truly just spend so much time like scrolling down my own For You page on TikTok or watching my own subscriptions on YouTube and being like, wow, these people are so cool. And some of them end up knowing who I am, which is crazy, yeah.
Someone writes, how have you adjusted to living in Brooklyn?
It's difficult. I think I've learned, I've been in Brooklyn now for 3 years, mostly through the pandemic, so it was difficult to have a sense of New York as a whole because a lot of the city was shut down. I think that was the case for a lot of cities across the world. It's just everything kind of shifted. But I'm lucky I have a family member there. My mom's actually coming to visit me next week, which I'm really excited about. But it's difficult. It's just like, it's hard to make friends, and that's like the truth for anything, but it's difficult adjusting to a city you've never been to before or lived in before. And I am from California, so I moved like literally the farthest point I possibly could to the other side of the coast. So it was just a difficult adjustment, I think, from that baseline. But it's also now we're going back into, adjusting, since this pandemic and figuring out how routines can work and stuff. I feel like I'm like meeting Brooklyn for the first time in some way, and I'm like now having to adjust my relationship to it a little bit. And I'm just very introverted. I like to stay inside a lot. New Yorkers don't really do that, so I've got to challenge myself a little bit.
My personal follow-up to that is, with so much of your career being online, you could be anywhere. So, how did you select Brooklyn as where you wanted to relocate?
There's a couple reasons. My family had been there before previously. My brother ended up going to college there, and we're roommates, so it's easier to kind of like have a family member that also is in Brooklyn for a reason. And my management team is also based in Brooklyn, so there was a work reason to be there. And I think from a personal level too, as someone who ended up not going to college, it was important for me, it felt like, to have a jumping off point and to kind of challenge myself to a new experience outside of my hometown and figuring out like, okay, who am I outside of living with my parents? And yeah, I ended up living with them again because of COVID, but I'm now out of that and like kind of figuring that out. So yeah, there's a couple of reasons, but it's definitely kind of far away. I think about moving back to California pretty frequently.
Relatedly, someone asked, do you ever wish that you went to college or learned the technical aspects of music production?
All the time. I think there will always be a question in my mind. It's very everything, everywhere, all at once of me to just wonder about the other worlds that I might be in. And I am so thankful for the pathway that I've had in my life, but I will always wonder, like, what would that have been like, especially coming from a family of educators. Like, college was just always the thing that I thought was going to be destined for me. And, you know, even telling my parents that it wasn't what I had, you know, imagined for myself after I graduated, and telling them I wanted to take a gap year, like, they both had to shift their worldviews too, because, you know, I'm their first kid, and I was supposed to go do this thing, and I didn't end up doing the thing. And so it was scary, and I'll always wonder, but, you know, it's I don't know, maybe college Maya is out there somewhere in a different multiverse, just living it up. I have no idea, yeah.
Can you talk about who your team is? Who are the most important people and artists should think about bringing on board as their fan base starts to grow?
So from a technical perspective, legal is definitely one of the biggest. You want to have someone who's a really great lawyer on your side to protect you. And then outside of that, management is probably the other side that everybody thinks about when they think of artists and kind of who's on the team. I am really lucky. I have 2 managers that work with me, and I have a day-to-day manager, Jackie, who's with us today. Shout out to Jackie. And I think, you know, those are kind of the 2 branches that I see as being the most important. I don't really know if I do feel like I just got really lucky with the people that I work with, so I wish I could kind of provide more advice on that front, but lawyer, get a good lawyer, yeah.
We just crossed the 5-minute mark of time left, so if you have any more questions, this is your last chance to submit. Let's see, what does that say? Someone wrote early on, can you discuss your artist development and why artist development, both in craft and business, is important to an artist's success, whether signed to a label or not?
Feels like I could answer this in probably like a bunch of different ways. I'll just kind of focus on, I don't know, I think I might not even fully understand the definition of artist development.
That's why I skipped the question. I didn't know exactly what it meant.
How would you guys define artist development? Does anybody have any answer for that? Oh boy, ooh. Okay. Be yourself. I would say the way I'm thinking about artist development in this question is kind of like how you develop yourself from like a production side or a branding side or like a personal side. I think it's important to let yourself grow as your project grows. And I think about that especially from the perspective of somebody who started off being a teenager, and clearly you're not going to be the person that you are when you're 16 for the rest of your life. And so for me, figuring out how to grow not only from like a creative perspective, but from like a personal perspective, and allow my project to always help me have that space and room to move between who I want to be, who I have been, and whatever is moving forward. I think that's important. You don't want to pigeonhole yourself into being one singular identity for the rest of your life, and I think that's true for any career that you end up having. So yeah, just let yourself be open to change. Be open to the unknown, and know that you don't have to have all the answers for everything. Of course, it's helpful to have some of them, but don't put pressure on yourself to feel like you need to be one version of yourself forever. Maybe I'm more talking to myself, but I think that's an important piece, yeah.
All right, somebody says, it's more of a command.
Oh.
Talk more about experiences on Twitch.
Okay. My experience on Twitch, I haven't been on it in a minute, but it was something that was really important to me in the beginning of the pandemic, largely because that was how I was connecting with people online. I think Twitch had this huge resurgence at the beginning of the pandemic too, because everybody was watching things on streams. I played Among Us with AOC. Like, what? That is the crazy. I could be in a history textbook in the future and I wouldn't even know. Like, I think it is wild to me that I feel really thankful because I think Twitch opens so many avenues for people and content creators and musicians especially. I remember doing an event that Twitch put on where musicians were like playing music from home, and they did like a 24-hour live stream of different artists, playing music. It was really funny to watch some of the artists try and set up at-home streaming setups because they've never touched that before. But I think it's really cool to be able to engage different facets of like what you enjoy and connecting with people off the basis of those things. I know I mentioned that video games are something that I try to keep to myself, but it's also something that I do enjoy talking about. I love playing games like Stardew Valley or Overwatch, and I want to find other people that talk and like enjoy those things too. And so Twitch was a place for me to do that. It's still something that I think about engaging, but quite honestly, my PC is not very good right now, and I don't think that I could stream super well. But it's a very cool space to, I think, from like a personal perspective and also from an artist perspective, to think about being a part of, because it is like a very different audience to kind of get to know. Yeah.
All right, we're in our last minute. Last question. Do you think you'd ever go to college in the future? What would your major be? There's a great college in Southeast Ohio, ...
It's good to know. I mean, this is the closest I've come to going to college so far. I actually have thought about it. I think school is something that I did really enjoy when I was in it. I was applying for an architecture degree initially when I was going to potentially go to college. I don't think that's what I would do anymore. I'm watching my brother do it. It looks way too difficult and time-consuming and exhausting. I think if I ended up going back, it probably wouldn't be a music focus. It would be actually around marine biology, which I don't know what schools have good programs for that. Don't know what Ohio University's program is like for that. I'm seeing some head shakes. But I've thought about it. That's another thing that I never got to learn really more about. I think I would see college as, thankfully, a place where I could kind of explore other interests that I haven't been able to look at yet. Mm-hmm.
Well, now I wish I could sit here and interview you about marine biology for another half an hour, because I'm very curious about this. But yeah, we have to wrap up here. So thanks again, Maya mxmtoon, for your time today.
Thank you.
And thanks, everybody, for your great questions. And thanks to OU for putting on the Music Industry Summit.
Woo. Thank you, guys, and thank you.